Alright, instructional 2 is on case fans. Now I could do two examples. I'm actually going to see if I can do both. One with a flexible 0.8mm thick door panel for a Roseville Challenger ATX mid-tower case, and one with an older sturdy back. The actual solid parts where it doesn't bend. We'll do the solid part first. They're generally the same idea, but the flexible doors require a little more maneuvering. Now I'm going to move the webcam here in a second. I have two different fans. I'm going to put the thicker fan on here. They're both 80mm. They're both 80mm. One is just thicker than the other. Alright, so we've got my thick fan right here. See, it's a little thicker than the other fan. We've got two. One's thin, one's thick. We're going to put the thick one on here. It doesn't really make a difference how thick they are, actually. Now, with your fan, you will see, on most fans, some cheap fans don't have these little arrows. See, an arrow, arrow. The arrow that points sideways along tells you which way the fan will actually rotate, which in this case, it's pointing that way, which means the fan rotates in this direction. Now, the arrow that points, see how it's pointing towards the end of it? That tells you which way air blows. Air will pass through from this side down. So I want the air to blow out of my case. So this arrow pointing out needs to point right there, so it goes out of my case. I'm going to back this up a little bit. I'm going to move my mouse. Now the mistake a lot of people do is, or make, is that they will take one screw and tighten it the whole way immediately, making it, sorry, I gotta move that, making it very difficult to get the fan in properly, because when you have one screw completely tight, the other one's going a little bit crooked. They go in an angle, making it really hard to tighten them the entire way, especially with a bad screwdriver like I have. The easiest way to counteract that, let me get my screws out and I will show you. You want to loosely thread all four screws with your fingertips in a row. Where did I put my screws? Oh, there they are. Now, again, loosely thread, fingertip only. I will get all four screws out so I have them ready. I got a whole mess of a million kinds of screws here. Alright. Your case fan screws will look like this typically. They almost always do. Different colors maybe, but thick, black. You can see the head is about the same size as the rest of the screw. What you want to do, you just line up one hole, and you don't have to line up all four immediately. Sticker side out there. You line up one hole, just like that. You want to look at it. You want to make sure it's dead center, because if you have a little bit of resistance going in, the screw's going to thread crooked, and it won't get as tight as it can. And you just spin it just a little teeny tiny bit. You don't even need to spin it until it's firm. Just enough to hang on to it. Okay? And then you go in a circle. Don't go diagonally. Going diagonally can actually cause more problems, make it harder to get them in. Now, if you start threading and it gets stiff immediately, you're off center. Pull it back out, double check it, make sure it's lined up perfectly straight. Trust me, the extra 30 seconds to do this is well worth the 10 minutes you'll save screwing it in there. And just very loosely, very, very loosely, start to tighten. Now, see, this one's actually rough. It's not matching the size of the case. Considering the thickness of the case metal, that is not unusual. Usually thinner cases tend to be accurately screwed, and some of these are a little off because you have to thread through thicker metal. Alright. And once you have all four of them in, you can start to tighten one at a time the entire way. Now what you do, you want to make sure I've got a firm grip with my knuckle here, because I'm good with pushing on my knuckles, pushing on the corner, the back part of the fan. Push it on, and you make sure you've got a good grip. Now sometimes you can even let go of it to double check. And you push firmly against you firmly push the fan against the case. That will ensure that you get it without skipping any threads, without stripping the plastic and going in at an angle. Because when you go in at an angle, you leave room for the fan to wiggle. Now from here out, I'm probably going to fast forward a segment of the video until I get to the next one. And then you just repeat. And screw it in there. Careful not to strip them, okay, unless you are willing to buy extras. You can strip them out, and with painted screws like these, you know, they're silver looking underneath, but they're black on the surface. Oops, see how I pushed it in there and it kind of popped in a little bit? It's not what I wanted to do. Anyways, I messed that up. I want this to go out right here. By the way, make sure your fan is fed through the little notch here if you want to get it perfectly flush, because otherwise you're going to have a hell of a time with that. I messed mine up. Great tutorial video. Now, to test that they are as tight as you can get them to avoid vibration without really stripping anything out, just simply push on the screws. If you push on the tips of the screws, you can feel if there's any give. You know, sometimes the case has give, but the screws don't. As long as your screws are fastened firmly to your case, you're fine. Keep in mind these wires. If you are mounting it as I did, with the wires towards the case, make sure to feed them through that little notch. If they come, you know, really tightly wound, you might have to peel them apart and feed them one wire at a time. But otherwise you won't get it flush, and you may possibly damage your wires. So there you go. It's in the entire way. We're good to go. Now we're going to do this a little harder with a flexible case. Alright, here we have a flexible board that I have standing by itself. This is the front panel, you could call it, the side panel where you open it up and typically work on your motherboard. Now, I'm going to repeat the same process, get my screws out ahead of time to make it, you know, quicker and easier to set up. I'm out of screws, what the fuck? Not cool, I'm out of screws. Aww. Alright, we can't do this right now. We'll do this one later. Clip that out. Now typically, alright, I know you can't see in this because I have it on, but I'm going to show you. Here's the back of the case, front, top. Naturally the motherboard side is in there, and up here on the front would be your door panel, many of which have windows. This one just has a grate. Now the standard fan setup is to have outtake on top. It's to have an outtake fan, an outtake fan, intake fan here to help push the heatsink. Now it depends on which way your heatsink's blowing. My heatsink is blowing air into the heatsink, blowing it that way. So I would put the fan up here because I have room for two fans. 1, 2. Intake. This fan would be an outtake, forcing the GPU and all the heat down here out, while forcing extra airflow to go in through here and cool this. Up front I have an intake fan. Overall you want to have roughly even pressure going in as coming out. It'll keep your case dust free for the most part, and it'll also, sometimes if you have too much pressure, it can actually cause hardware errors. But yeah, it depends. Now a lot of people have this fan blowing outward, but it all depends on really your rig. Ideal is to have outtakes, intake, outtake, intake. You want to have roughly the same amount of pressure. So there you go. I am out of screws to put on this other door one. I don't know where I put it, so I'm sorry, but I can't show you the installation for the door just now.